A little while ago, I brought up the concept of airbrushing your Nerf blasters, which is, at the time, not a very popular thing to paint with, and even now is still not a very common thing to paint with. In fact, really the only person I know of that actually does this is Foam Data Services, which was kindly pointed out to me in my last video, and sure enough, I've seen their paint jobs numerous times and had no idea they actually did this with an airbrush. I mean, a lot of their stuff is also hydro dipping, but hey, they also use an airbrush, so I did find somebody else who was doing it. Out of all of the people out there, I have found one. In fact, if you look at any kind of painting guide for Nerf stuff, well, they pretty much recommend using spray cans like Rust-Oleum's or, God help you, Krylon Fusion. And, well, you can get pretty good results with that. Bobololo posted his, what was it? It was the hammer shot. Very, very beautiful looking hammer shot. Holy shit, did that look amazing! And, I mean, if you look at Coop's stuff, it's all pretty good. It ain't perfect. I mean, if you zoom in on the pictures of his web store, you can see all the little bumps and scrapes and areas he's had problems with, but hey, they still look pretty good, and God help you if you look at Drax stuff, and it looks terrible. Sorry, Drac, but it's, well, I mean, I can kind of understand you don't really put time or effort because you're trying to put out a video every day, but hey, yeah, it looks worse than most of the stuff I've tried to paint. Jesus Christ. And, well, that brings me to today's video, which is probably going to be a long one. I'm not kidding. I don't know how long it's going to be, but I already wrote up pretty much an entire written, like, how I've done this so far kind of thing with the airbrushing, and that took me about an hour to write, and it was on the front page of Reddit for about 4 hours, and then disappeared, and oh well. But I still contributed something, and today hopefully I'm contributing a little bit more. So, we'll start with the most obvious question. Why paint with an airbrush? Well, there's a couple of simple reasons for that. One, if you're painting with a spray can, well, you're kind of at the mercy of the spray can. It's really hard to judge how much paint you're using, how much pressure you're using to paint, and so forth. It's actually pretty much impossible. And getting any kind of detail with that, well, it's not going to happen. In fact, most people use spray cans for one or two colors and then hand brush everything else in. And, well, why not hand brush stuff if that works so well? It doesn't really work that well. You have to thin your paints a lot, and even then it's really hard to get that kind of factory finish, I would say, that you can get with like a spray can. That's one of the reasons why people like to use spray cans to start with. That it's incredibly fast. And that's kind of important when we're talking about blasters and we're trying to make them look like sci-fi things or real things if you're dumb enough. And, well, there's things you can do with an airbrush that you can't do normally with a spray can or a paintbrush. Let's, how about gradients? Well, you can't do that with a spray can. Well, you can. It's incredibly difficult, but you can. Candy coatings, you know, where you have like a metallic color. Yeah, you're not going to be doing that with spray cans or anything like that. You're going to pretty much need an airbrush. And, well, there's a lot of other reasons. How about cost? One of these little things of paint is, this is $2.50. This little tiny jar of paint is $2.50. And this will probably paint an entire Centurion. Doesn't look like it, but when you consider the fact that you're going to use 2 to 3 parts thinner for every little bit of paint, and you're using a finely controlled airbrush, well, you're going to get quite a bit of mileage out of that. I know some spray cans can be bought for $3 or $4, but that's not good quality pigment. This is excellent quality pigment. And if you want to get even more crazy, this kind of stuff right here is, well, generally like $4 a bottle. I got it for $1. And this is like the highest, like, well, not the highest quality, but super high quality pigment. And I have thinned this crap a lot and still gotten some beautiful looking paint out of it. So that's another reason. And I'll probably go into some more. I don't really have a kind of a, what do you call it, a script or anything in front of me. I'm just doing this through my head to make sure that I actually know the material before I go over it. And some of you might be thinking, well, getting into air painting or airbrushing is probably really expensive, right? No, No, it's not. In fact, you can see my original airbrush here. I bought at a thrift store for 20 bucks, and that was overspending quite a bit. Looking back now, I wouldn't have done that. And this is a very simple airbrush. It's got a thing right here that you can put your paint cups into. This is not the correct paint cup for this airbrush, and an on-off switch, and it siphons paint through the needle and paints. It worked, and to get over the compressor issue, I hooked it up to an air tank that I was filling up at a gas station. It'd give me about 15 minutes of painting. It worked. Kind of a waste of money, but it worked. And we'll get over why that was kind of a waste of money to begin with, well, right about now. Because I'm no longer painting with this. I am now painting with this. And let's see if I can turn on. No, I can't. Oh well. This is a Central Pneumatic oilless airbrush compressor. And some of you be like, hey, I recognize that. That's the crap that Harbor Freight sells. And you would be correct. And if you know anything about Harbor Freight, is that all their stuff is Chinese and super cheap. In fact, this compressor right here, as of this recording, is $70. And you might think, $70? It's a hell of a lot! But again, you go into the concept of how cheap the paints and stuff are. This, like airbrush cans, and air cans and stuff like that, build up pretty quick. If you're spending $7 or $8 a pop, and they go way higher than that if you're getting automotive quality paints, it gets up there pretty damn quick. And yet, this thing right here, $70, and you can probably get it cheaper for that. And, well, this is just one part, and of course the other part is right here. This is also a Central Pneumatic airbrush. And yes, it is an airbrush. And let's kind of go on the differences between the last one and this one. For instance, this one has what's called a dual stage, or two-stage, or whatever. When I push this down, air comes out. When I pull this back, it starts releasing paint. The farther I pull it back, the more paint I get, which gives me incredible control of whatever I'm painting. And that's very, 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 very important. Because now I can get ready to paint and then slowly start painting and not have to worry about anything. With that other thing was completely just on-off. It did not do anything other than that. And you might be thinking, well, I'm sure this was really expensive, right? I've seen like those Awada ones that go for $130. This was $21, and I had a 20% coupon, so it was even cheaper than that. And some of you may be screaming, there's no way you're painting anything with a $21 airbrush and a $70 compressor, and you would be dead flippin' wrong. Now, this is by no means impressive, but here is something I have painted thus far. And this is just me testing stuff. Not exactly meant to be a finished product or anything like that, but hey, it works pretty damn well. You want to see something that I considered somewhat of a finished product painted? How about this? This is a shoulder off of a Zaku, a test Zaku kit, a cheap one we just bought and cut the pieces out of and put together. And I know it's kind of hard to see on video, but this is flawless. The paint job is absolutely incredible. And this was probably the main reason I bought the whole airbrush kit thing, because I wanted to be able to paint models and make them my own. And when I thought about that, I thought about Nerf stuff. And well, yeah, it's again pretty hard to see, but this is absolutely beautiful. I'm very, very impressed with how this turned out, and that makes me excited to get started on Nerf stuff. Well, of course, there's got to be downsides to using an airbrush. When I'm painting little tiny splotches, it's really hard to cover the entirety of a blaster even this small. In fact, it took a considerable amount of time to do this, and it takes a lot of effort. While with a frickin' spray can, you can just spray paint over it and let it go. This is going to take some considerable effort to get done. But hopefully, even in this horrible lighting and whatnot, you can see the actual differences of how this painting turned out. And you can kind of see right there where it started to get kind of adventurous when I spray painted this, and I had a little bit of blue left out. I mean, drops of blue, and I still got all of this done out of it. So, it can make some pretty incredible stuff, and that should get you excited. So, I'm going to go over the tools I have used for airbrushing, and then in a separate video, we're going to go over the actual airbrushing. So, we'll move this out of the way. We'll start with the first thing. You obviously need an airbrush, or in this case, a whole system. This is a Central Pneumatic one. Like I said, it was $70 at Harbor Freight. Now, why would you want to use this instead of like a pancake oilless compressor or something like that? There's a few reasons. For one, when I turn this on, I can still talk over that, and you're not going to be any wiser. You can barely hear this thing turn on, and that's incredible. The other reason is that I can finally tune the air pressure using this thing right here. This allows me to absolutely gauge how much pressure of air I am using with my paint. And it's, again, impossible to see with the needle there, but it is currently at, what is it, like 22 psi? And when I paint, that brings it down to a comfy 16 to 18 psi. Which is very, very good for airbrushing, so I've found. Works flawlessly. And this big, huge thing right here is actually something that grabs liquid, or it condenses water, basically. This keeps water, because, you know, air brings up water. This keeps it out of my paint. Very, very important, and while you can buy this as a separate unit and slam it onto your air compressor if you already have one, they're about $30 for this kind of thing. This one came with it, and of course it's super quiet, and I'll demonstrate that. So if I were to start painting, I can push down, and paint's coming out there, and it's turned on. And yeah, it makes some noise, but it sure as heck isn't much noise. And you can see I can pretty much paint forever, and I can just keep going. It's not going to go any lower than 16, 17 psi, which is very, very useful. So yeah, this entire kit right here is probably going to run you about 80, 90, $100, under 100 for sure. And that can be quite a chunk of change to get into. But if you're like me and you have another use for it, for example, I'm again going to use it for models, well, I can definitely rationalize that kind of expenditure. It's got a nice little carry handle right here. We'll push that off to the side. The next thing you'll need is paints. So, there are different kinds you can get. There's our enamels and acrylics and lacquers, or lacquer acrylics, whatever the heck they are. And that's these little things. Now again, I can get these Tamiya acrylics at my local hobby town for, again, $2.50, $2.49 per. Not bad. And the thinner for that, because if you're using that type of paint, you're going to want to use that type of paint's thinner. Well, this is acrylic paint thinner for Tamiya, and this was, I think, $9. Yeah, $8.95, $9. And I have used this extensively, and I have wasted a lot of it, and it's still almost full. So, yeah, it's going to get you quite a bit out of it. But for these Mr. Colors, well, these are acrylic, but they're lacquer-based acrylic, so I'm going to have to use a much harsher thinner for those, and for that, I bought this giant thing of Duplicolor lacquer thinner. This was, I believe, $11, something like that, maybe $9. And it's a giant, giant jar, and it's going to last me forever, which is good because you've got to use this to clean your airbrush as well as actually paint and thin. So, yeah, it's good to have a big amount of it, and this works pretty darn good. So that covers the airbrush and the paints and the stuff you need for paints, but of course you're going to need some other things as well. For example, I recommend these little pipette things. It's, you know, right here, squishy thing. I put it in the I put it in the thinner, and I can pull out the thinner and squirt it into my paint cup, and I'm good to go. These, you know, these are going to be a couple of bucks. It's going to depend on what you get. And let's start with another important thing. Primer. This is Rust-Oleum primer for plastics, and what this does is absolutely, it's pretty much mandatory. It's going to cover up any imperfections on your blaster, or model in this case, and it's also going to help your paint stick. Now, this stuff is really, really, really good, because if you just spray it on your blaster, it's going to make a nice, even coat of white. In this case, I picked white. You can pick different colors of primer. And then I can paint over that and not have to worry about anything bleeding through. And I have scratch tested this, and it's very hard to scratch off the primer. And we'll get to prepping your blaster here in a little bit, because that's going to be an important thing. But yeah, you're going to need a primer. And this right here, you don't have to have. In fact, normal isopropyl alcohol will work, but this is what I'm using to clean my blaster with. So once I've taken my blaster apart and I want to prep it for painting, you can sand the crap out of your blaster. That's totally legit. You can do that. You don't have to. In fact, if I put this on a paper towel and just wipe down the blaster liberally for it and let it dry, this will get rid of any oils or dirts or anything on the blaster and help the primer stick to it effortlessly. Rubbing alcohol does the same thing. This is a little bit harsher, but this worked pretty good in my last test, so I'm just going to go with this, because I have this whole entire can of it, because I was using this for oil painting. This is what I use to thin oil paints. And not entirely mandatory, but certainly something you should probably think about getting. This is called an airbrush cleaning station, and basically what that lets you do is when you are done airbrushing or you want to switch colors or something like that, normally you have to spray this and get rid of all the crap inside of it. And this makes that way easier because you just shove it in there and you spray in there. So you can, if I put on my little cup here, come on, get in there, and I'm painting, and let's say I want to switch colors, well, I'm going to have to run a bunch of thinner through my brush, and that thinner I can just pour in here, and that makes it so it doesn't get all over my hands or get over anything I don't want to paint or ruin my paint job if I get some on the bare paint. So this kind of self-contained little thing was, again, I think $7 Harbor Freight. Very, very important to have, although not completely necessary. Now, we'll go over just some basic airbrushing tips. These little things are going to come with your airbrush. The other airbrush I bought came with them. In fact, here it is. And this airbrush came with one. And this is meant for more paints, and you can definitely use this for more paint, but you can fit a lot of paint in one of these things, and it's kind of hard to use all of that paint, let's say. And what I've done here is I've filled this with thinner. So, let's say I want to switch colors. Well, I can definitely just pour thinner in here and get it done, but let's say I wanted to clean my airbrush instead of having to worry about getting this perfectly clean, or if I just want to clean, throw this in some thinner really quick, like a little dish of thinner, and get that cleaned out separate. If I want to clean my actual airbrush and make sure nothing gets built up inside here, well, I just slap this in, run it through until it's clean, kind of brush it in there or something, and then brush it on whatever surface I'm doing, like a piece of cardboard or something like that, and make sure it's clean. Run this through there, and I don't have to worry about filling this up or using a little dropper into the actual airbrush, which I still have to kind of do, but this helps a lot. So I keep my thinner, I keep this basically just full of thinner, and that helps me quite a bit in cleaning. And, well, we kind of got to this prospect of you're not going to be able to, let's say, it's hard to paint a huge object with it. Well, in this case, again, this was just a test, but basically what you're going to want to do, and I will go over this in my actual painting video, is you are going to prime this. You're going to kind of pull it away. You have your paint in there. Let's say I have paint in here like this. I'm going to start it away from the blaster, move it on, and then I'm going to start generally applying paint, and I'm going to do some pretty gentle circles and stuff with it, because I want to put down just a little bit of paint, kind of like what's up here. You can kind of see the stuff through, and just kind of get it lightly coated and kind of go over it. And the distance my airbrush is from the target is how lightly and how lightly the paint is going to go on, and how much surface area my paint is actually going to cover, which is important, because as I want to do, if you notice right here, it's kind of crazy blotchy, but up here it's pretty much flawless. This is an even coat. You're going to start off pretty far away, and then as you go on to adding more and more paint, you're going to get closer and closer and closer and add quite a bit more paint, and that's going to give you your even coat, which is pretty important. That's basically the whole name of the game here, is even coating. So keep in mind, if you're planning on using this to, let's say, paint a Centurion, well, you're going to be at it for a long time. Now, the other name of the game here is testing. You're going to want to test absolutely everything. You're going to want to test your paints, how your paints react to the plastic, how your paints react to your thinner, how your paints react to your primer, and how your paints react to your paints. For example, I already know for a fact if I were to use this Tamiya paint on top of this lacquer paint, the Tamiya paint is going to crackle to hell and back and not actually stick to the blaster, no matter how well I let it dry. Which kind of sucks, but I can't do that. So if you're planning on using like a base coat of maybe like a duplicolor vinyl dye of white and then go over it, the rest of it with a paint, make sure you test all that first. This kind of stuff is important. I have tons of shells laying around and they were really easy to go because all I have to do is prime it, wait about an hour, go out there and start painting. So test absolutely everything you do. There is going to be no better learning tool than fricking up absolutely everything. And you're going to want to frick it up when you're not actually trying, then frick it up when you're actually trying. So that kind of covers the basics, and of course I'm going to have to go on more to it when I'm actually painting, but for right now, we're going to leave it with this. This is absolutely everything you're going to need to get started with airbrushing, and while it's quite a bit, hopefully this kind of preview right here shows you the kind of stuff that you can get with airbrushing. And of course, we're actually going to airbrush something. And tune in for that, because we're going to airbrush this proton. How well is this going to turn out? Probably terribly, but hey, we're going to give it a shot anyway. So, hopefully you learned something, and other than that, you have yourself a wonderful day.